My name is Sean, and I am the substitute teacher who is always appointed on low attendance Sundays. So I appreciate you guys being here. Our message this morning is on the subject of humility, and I've got to say, it is the best sermon that you have ever heard. I mean, it's really, like half of you understand sarcasm, the rest of you don't have the gift of interpretation for sarcasm. That's all right. So if you turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 14, if you don't have a Bible with you, that is page 729 in the Bibles that we have around the seats there. I can't read those. I mean, I don't know if anyone in here is on the finance team, because can we please get some money to get like some large print middle-aged editions, because I can't read them. And so I'm not going to use that, but the words that I have on my page in a huge font are the same as the ones there. So page 729 in those Bibles, if you turn there, Luke chapter 14. And while you're turning there, I'll start out with a story. In Max Dupree's book, Leadership Jazz, he tells the story about a German machine tool company that accomplished something that had never been accomplished before. They managed to create a drill bit that was the smallest ever, but it was so strong that it could actually bore a hole through steel. And they're pretty impressed with their great accomplishment, eager to share it with the world and to get feedback from other people in their field. So they sent off a sample to the Russians and to the Americans and to the Japanese. Now, they never heard anything from the Russians, but they heard very quickly. You got a very quick response back from the Americans, who were very excited at the opportunity to make some money off of this thing. Can we license it? Can we sell it and manufacture it here and all that? But the opinion they really wanted most was the Japanese. I mean, everyone respects the Japanese, their incredible technological advances and accomplishments, so they really wanted to know what they thought of what the Germans had created. And they waited, and days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, no answer. Finally, they got a reply back from a company in Japan. And, it was the predictably polite letter, right? It was very, very humble and congratulating the German engineers on their incredible feat, their wonderful accomplishment. But then there was a P.S. P.S., we have enclosed your drill bit with a small alteration. The German engineers were so excited, they couldn't wait to see what improvement the Japanese had made to their drill bit. So they tore into the package, and they pulled this thing out, and they looked at it everywhere, and they didn't see that any change had been made. And then they got it under magnification, and only then could they see that the Japanese engineers had bored a hole through the world's smallest drill bit. There are times when we feel like we're doing really well, right? We're feeling a little bit proud, and all of us have been there. Some of us live there, right? But all of us have been there in a kind of state of pride, and maybe for good reason. We did something pretty amazing. We're pretty good people. But then along comes Jesus, and he just pokes a hole right through it. That's what Jesus does in our story today. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus is invited to dinner with a bunch of prideful people. By the time he leaves that dinner party, they've got holes punched all in them. So let's read the entire story, the first 14 verses of Luke 14, and then we'll back up and we'll look at it in more detail in 3 scenes. So let's start at the very beginning. Verse 1, Luke 14, verse 1. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and the experts in the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out?" And they had nothing to say. Verse 7, when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this person your seat." Then, humiliated, you'll have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Verse 12, then Jesus said to his host, When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So let's look at that in 3 scenes. Scene 1, the scandalous healing. Jesus is the visiting preacher in this small village. He's on his way to Jerusalem, and on his way, he's kind of preaching on his way there. So he speaks at the local synagogue that Sabbath morning, and as was the custom, the leaders of that synagogue, the Pharisees, invited him over for a meal. Now, this in itself, having the local philosopher or preacher over to your house was a real status symbol, that you were a big enough deal to have them over. And they would have this huge feast, and the size of the feast and the number of seats at that table, the size of your dining room was also a mark of status. So already we see they have this important guest and this big feast. Already we see that this Pharisee who's hosting this party wants to seem like a big deal. And he is a big deal to be able to pull that off. Now, like in the developing world, much of the developing world today, in those days in the Middle East, the homes weren't closed off. It was hard to have really a private affair. So I've been in homes, like, say, in India or Guatemala, where there are no windows to close. There's just a hole in the wall, and there's not really a door to lock, and so the whole neighborhood shows up. If there's a visitor, especially if he's really white and everybody else isn't, like, everybody shows up. So Jesus shows up. He's a new face in the crowd. Oh, I heard he's a visiting rabbi. I heard he did a great job this morning. Everyone begins to crowd around, leaning in the doors and windows, some of them even stepping into this Pharisee's house to get just a glimpse of this visitor. And one of these people, these outsiders who just wanders in from the neighborhood, is a man that the Bible said had abnormal swelling in his body. Now, some of you, if you're using a different translation, it may use the word dropsy. This man had dropsy. And we don't use either of those terms nowadays. We would call it edema. And edema, my sister-in-law, the very smart nurse, explained to me, using really small words so I could understand, is that basically that the liquid pools in your extremities, and it can fill the cavities of your body, and it's painful, and it can be life-threatening. It can cause breathing to be hard. Your heart has to pump and work harder and harder to get blood through this swollen mass that your body becomes. So the Pharisees, even they diagnosed the cause of dropsy, of edema, and they said it was caused by sin. They had a list of things, medical problems that they said weren't really medical problems at all. It was because you're a bad person. That's why you're blind. That's why you're deaf. That's why you're lame. That's why you have epilepsy, or why you have abnormal swelling. And so this guy would not be invited to the party. He was not invited to the party, but Jesus sees this man, and Jesus, being Jesus, he wants to heal him. He has compassion on him. And Jesus, though, notices that he is being carefully watched, verse 1. The word carefully watched in Greek was used by Aristotle to describe the way that an eagle looks at a rabbit. It's the way that a predator looks at its prey. That they looked at Jesus kind of out of the corner of their eye, just mess up. I can't wait to catch you. 7 times in the Gospels, Jesus heals on the Sabbath, and every time the Pharisees lose their ever-loving minds. They're so mad about it because the Pharisees believed on the Sabbath you shouldn't do anything that was work. You should not work. And they saw that helping your neighbor, like caring for someone who was hurting, was somehow work. They were more interested in upholding their laws than holding up their brother. And so Jesus picks a fight. He says, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? They were totally quiet. They didn't know what to say. Where is he going with this? And because of their silence, he just goes ahead and grabs the man. He grabs him and he heals him and he sends him on his way. And then Jesus says, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, wouldn't you immediately go pull them out? Isn't your neighbor, isn't a person worth more than your property? These Pharisees were more interested in trying to one-up each other instead of help up each other. And pride caused that. Pride, concern with self. So that's scene one. And Jesus, knowing that their lack of compassion was tied to their lack of humility, now he begins to lecture them on humility. Wouldn't you love to have Jesus over for dinner? So you can find out all the stuff that you need to fix in your life, right? And so it says in verse 7, this is scene 2, the humbled guests. And scene in verse 7, it says this: when Jesus noticed how the guests picked their places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. Now, we're in a series of messages on parables, and you're going to notice that this isn't really what we think of as a parable. I mean, it says right here, Jesus told them a parable. When Andy assigned me this passage, I immediately texted him and said, hey, there's not a parable here. And he goes, well, the Bible says it's a parable. It says Jesus told them a parable. So maybe there's something you don't know. He didn't say that, but that's kind of when... He's really snarky when he texts me. And so I went to studying, and what I learned was that, a parable is not just a story that has a spiritual lesson, but it can also be a play or an act that has a spiritual lesson, like when Jesus cleans out the temple. There he goes to the temple and he sees people setting up shop in there and exchanging money and ripping off the poor, and he knocks over the tables and he makes a whip and he chases them out, the evildoers out, that he's acting out what's going to happen at the end of time when God comes back and he clears out his temple and he purifies religion, and his temple becomes a place of prayer and not of exploitation, and he's acting that out. And so scholars say, well, that was a parable. It was an act with a spiritual lesson. But right here, what we have is some table manners, dinner etiquette that somehow is going to teach us a spiritual lesson. And so because it has a double meaning, it's a parable. So Jesus wants to talk to them about their humility and how it keeps them from being compassionate. So he says, when he noticed how they were picking their places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, don't take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, hey, give this person your seat. And then you'll be humiliated and you'll have to take the least important place. Jesus, after he heals this man, these guys didn't even stop to celebrate that this man had been healed. They just immediately began elbowing each other to try to get the best seat at the table. In their society, depending on where you sat at the table, it was a clear indication to all the crowd leaning in the windows and the doors how important you were, what your status was. If you sat closest to the host, you were the biggest deal in the room. If you sat next to that person, you were kind of the next important on down the line. So you finally got to like the least important person. And so they were all trying to appraise themselves. Of course, they're praising themselves much higher than they should have. And they're going, well, let's see, I'm a little bit better than maybe, Brian back there, but I'm not quite as good as Aaron over here. And they were trying to figure out, where do I stack up? And they were fighting to try to, it's pride. And so Jesus tells them the story that has a double meaning. At the end of all time, we're all going to gather before the throne of God, and there is going to be a party. Time ends in a party. It's going to be a wedding party. And the people of God will be clean and white like a bride. And they'll be married to the groom, which is Christ. And then there's going to be a huge feast. And Jesus is alluding to that. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, don't take the place of honor, but instead live with humility. He says, if you live your whole life about you and your status and trying to impress others with you, then when you get to the party, you're going to be humbled. But if you live your life now with humility as a servant, then when you get to the ultimate party, you're going to be honored. He's telling them if you go into a party and you seat yourself instead of letting the host seat you and determine your worth, if you determine that you need the good seat, hey, you don't know, someone might come late to this party who's more important than even you. And when that happens, the host is going to say, hey, get out of his seat. And now you don't have anywhere to sit. And the only seat that's going to be left is the lowest seat. There's a lesson here that our value isn't determined by us. We didn't make the guest list, but the host decides who's important. And our host, Jesus says, the most important is the most humble. The one who's not concerned with how important other people think she is. The one who's not really thinking about themselves at all. The humblest is actually going to be the greatest. That's who I want at my table at the great wedding feast. I want to give us four things that we need to remember that the Pharisees forgot. 4 things that if we forget them, we become prideful. 4 things if we remember them, they'll keep us humble. The Ohio State University conducted a study on humility, ironically. And they had they found 800 men ages 18 to 40, and they looked at their use of social media. Are they on social media? If they're on social media, how often are they on social media? When they're on social media, what are they posting on social media? They especially want to look at men who post selfies. And they wanted to see what kind of men in particular, what kind of men are on social media, and then how does that experience kind of change them? And in this study, the largest of its kind, 800 men across many ages, and this is what they found. They found that the participants who used social media, they used it to optimize their appearance, to make themselves look as good as possible, and to elevate their status. They wanted people to see that they were good looking or successful, or they married well, or whatever it is. So they were driven to get on social media because they were thinking about themselves and how they would appear to others, and they wanted to impress. This is what it says in the findings, the actual sentence from the findings of this study. It says, with the increased use of social media, they in turn became more concerned with their appearance and status and less capable of concern for others. There's a link between pride and a lack of compassion. And they got really specific, and they said, as people, in this case men, used social media, that they became more narcissistic and psychopathic. The most narcissistic and psychopath, narcissism is thinking of yourself more than you think about others, loving yourself. And psychopathy is the inability to feel the feelings of another human being or to even care. And the people who were most narcissistic and most psychopathic were the people who spent the most time on social media and the ones who posted selfies. So look, ladies, if you're dating, go check out his Instagram account, all right? If it's all pictures of him, psychopath. Run. I don't care how nice he is. Just run. Like he's telling you, I'm a psychopath. I don't care about your feelings, right? That's what he's telling you. I hope my daughters are listening. Okay, so we see there's a link between humility and compassion, or pride and being a psychopath. Romans 12:13 says, by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment. And if I could be prideful enough to add one little bit to Scripture, not only should we not think more highly of ourselves, we should probably not think about ourselves as often. And when we do, it keeps us from caring about others. So 4 things that will help us stay humble and avoid pride. 4 things we should remember, right? First, we are made. The word humility comes from the Latin word humus. I don't actually speak Latin, so it could be humus. I have no idea, but it's Humus, and it's the word for soil, and that's where we get our word humility. Humility is realizing that we are made from dirt, that we are made. That we are not self-made, but we are made by God from the lowest thing that there is. In Psalm 103:14, it says, God knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust. That's humbling. George Washington Carver came up with hundreds of uses for the peanut and the sweet potato. He was born into poverty, and because of the color of his skin, he was denied education for many, many years. He wasn't able to go to college until he was 30, which is pretty old to start. And he was a world-renowned scientist. It was because of his care for the poor that he grew up among that he tried to find as many uses as he could for the crops that they grew, which is sweet potatoes and peanuts. He said, how can I help the poor in my own neighborhood? Well, I'm gonna try to get as many uses out of that peanut in their backyard as I can. That'll help them. So his whole life he had this incredible intellect, but he used it to help others. That was his whole aim in life. And he attributed this desire to care for others, he attributed that to his own faith in God, a God who cared for him. He was given this award by the president, and he was asked, how did you become George Washington Carver? And in a moment of humility, he said, well, when I was a boy, I asked God to reveal to me the secrets of the universe, but when God said my mind was too small to hold them, I asked him to teach me the mysteries of the peanut instead. And he again and again throughout his life would constantly, in interview after interview, at award ceremony after award ceremony, he would always point out at the end, without my Savior, I am nothing. We have this myth in America of the self-made man, the self-made woman. We really feel prideful about, especially when it comes to giving. We think, well, but I earned this is mine. And there is no greater lie in our culture than the idea that we're self-made, that you pulled yourself up from your bootstraps and you did the things that you did, you accomplished what you accomplished because you are awesome and hardworking. But where did that awesomeness and that work ethic of yours come from? Wasn't that God-given too? Where did the opportunity, where did the parents who cared enough about you to put shoes on your feet, clothes on your back, and food on your plate, where did that come from? That was a gift from God, wasn't it? You woke up this morning. You were completely unconscious, really dead, right? But breathing. But God woke you up and gave you life, and you didn't choose to do that. Right now, your heart is beating life through every bit of your body, and you can't make it stop. God is gifting you with every beat, every second, everything that you are, the place you were born, the place where you worship, and the freedom to do so. It was all a gift. It is all a gift. It's not even lunchtime yet, and God has given you millions of gifts already. You are not self-made. You are God-made. That's humbling. That even the best of us have nothing to brag about. But all we are is a collection of gifts. So we are made. Second humbling truth for us this morning is that we are small. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 24 says, all men are like grass, and all their glory is like the flowers of the field, and the grass withers, and the flowers fall. Teddy Roosevelt had a larger-than-life personality. He was, I think even by his own admission, a bit of an egomaniac, right? War hero, big game hunter, big personality. And so he didn't get along with other big personalities, and dignitaries from other parts of the world would visit, and they would clash. I mean, the fights that they had in the Oval Office were pretty legendary. But he was aware of his ego. He was aware that he had a tendency to be arrogant, and so he would catch himself. On one particular occasion, though he said he did this numerous times, on one particular occasion, there was a visiting world leader, and they were just button heads. These two arrogant men fighting all day, unable to reach any kind of agreement. So worn out, he took this man out to the back porch of the White House, out to the backyard, and he pointed up to the sky to this one little white dot way out there on the horizon, and he said, that is the spiral galaxy in Andromeda. It is as large as our Milky Way. It is one of 100 million galaxies, and it consists of 100 billion suns, and each one of them larger than our sun. And there was a long, humbling pause. And then he said, now I think we are small enough. He recognized his own tendency to think he was a big shot, and so he humbled himself before the greatness of God and his creation to recalibrate, like we're doing this morning, to say, maybe I'm not so big after all. The Pharisees forgot that they were made by God. Yes, they were important. Yes, they were talented and they were brilliant, but they were That was all a gift from God. And they forgot that they're really small in the big scheme of things. And if we can remember what they forgot, we can stay humble. Number 3, we are poor. We are poor. We are made, we are small, we are poor. I was in the Mathare slum in Nairobi, Kenya, second largest slum in all of Africa. Today, it's about 600,000 people crammed into 3 square miles of rusting corrugated metal. Not a toilet in the place, not a drop of clean water. High crime, low literacy, everybody there living on less than $1.90 a day, which is the extreme poverty level in the world. And I asked this young man a strange question. As we were walking together, I asked him, when did you realize you were poor? That may sound like a weird question to you, but what I've learned as I've traveled the world and I've spent time with the poor is that they don't know, which is strange. You think, well, if you're born into poverty, you've never seen a doctor, you don't know how to read, you don't have clean water, you don't have food on your plate, people around you are dying of preventable causes. Don't you know that this is poor? But to them, it's normal. The slum is so big that all this young man ever saw was poverty, and he just thought it was normal. So I asked him, when was that moment for you? When did you realize that you were poor? And he said he was walking one day through the slum. He and a friend, he was about 10 years old, and there's this home there in the slum. The man lives there. They called the Movie Man. The Movie Man's house is made out of cardboard like everybody else's, but somehow he's rigged up some electricity to a generator, and he's got a TV and just a stack of pornographic DVDs or VHS tapes. And so men would take their shilling and they would hand it to the Movie Man, and he would open up the curtain. He'd cut a window in the side of this cardboard house, and he would open up the curtain, and for a few minutes, these men could escape the doldrums of their life and get lost in a pornographic movie for just a few minutes. That's how the Movie Man made his living. It was a slow day, though, for the Movie Man. There weren't a lot of customers. And so this young man I was talking to, he said when he was 10, he was walking by, and the Movie Man pulled him and his friend over and said, would you like to watch something? And we don't have any money. And he said, okay. And he opened up the window, and they stood on boxes, and they looked in through the window, and they watched a movie. And it wasn't pornographic. It was just some American movie. He doesn't know what it was. At the time, he didn't speak the language. He didn't speak English. He doesn't know what it was even about. But he just sat wide-eyed and awestruck at what he saw. There was a family with a mom and a dad. And there were children there, and they sat at a table in chairs. And there were plates, these white porcelain plates and silverware. And in the middle of the table, for all the people to share, was just bowl after plate of food. And there was a pitcher of clean water, and he watched as people filled their glasses with this perfectly clear water. And he watched as they scooped spoonful after spoonful of food onto their plate. And he watched as they talked and they laughed together. And when they ran out of something, they just scooped more. And it just seemed to keep coming. When they ran out of water, they just poured more. It was endless. And he said that looking through that window at that scene, I realized I'm poor. There are people who don't live this way. This isn't normal. He suddenly realized what he lacked. There's a man named Isaiah in the Old Testament. Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah goes to the temple. Isaiah's a very proud man. He's related to royalty. He has been chosen by God to be his messenger to God's nation, Israel. And at the time, the greatest nation on earth, it was the only nation in history chosen by God. You're going to be my people, and I'm going to be your God, and I'm giving you a special purpose on earth. And he was proud of that. But God did something amazing. He opened up a window between earth and heaven so that Isaiah could see beyond his greatness and see the greatness of God. And looking through that window, he saw God seated on a throne and angelic beings made of flame circling the throne, shouting, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is filled with his glory." And Isaiah, this proud, accomplished, important man, fell to his knees and he said, "Woe to me! I am ruined, because I'm a man of unclean lips, from a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. See, if I compare my kids to your kids in the restaurant, I feel like a really good parent, right? Like if I compare the way that I talk to people with the way that you go off on your political angry rants on Facebook, I mean, I feel like I'm doing pretty good with self-control. If I compare myself to you, I can really walk away feeling great. But when I look through the window of heaven, when I compare myself to Christ and Christ alone, I realize I'm poor. I'm poor. I'm a man of unclean lips from a nation, yes, even this nation, that is unclean. That I'm in need of God. So I'm small, and I'm poor. I'm in need of God. But lastly, we're loved. You see, not only should we not think too highly of ourselves, but some Christians, they take this too far and they think too lowly of themselves. And they're always groveling, always feeling worthless and like they're nobody and they're unlovable. But God says, no. Yes, it's true I made you out of dirt. It's true that you're really small and finite and temporary. And it's true that, yes, you're broken and you're in need. But it's also true that still, I love you. I love you. Not because you're awesome, not because of what you've accomplished, not because you're brilliant or pretty or kind or religious, but I just love you. Ephesians 2, verse 4 and 5, but God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, he made us alive together with Christ. By grace, it's a gift. By grace, you've been saved. 1 John 3:16, how do we know that God loves us? Prove it. Well, this is how we know what love is, that Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. Romans 8:15 tells us that the Spirit of God that we've now received doesn't make us slaves so that we live in fear, but rather the Spirit you've received brought about your adoption to sonship. By him we cry, Abba, Father, in Aramaic, Daddy. Daddy. I'm small, I'm made, I'm broken and poor and in need, but yet God says, I want that one. I want him to be my boy. I want to give you my name and a place at my table. I love you. So don't think too highly of yourself, but hey, don't think too low of yourself either. You are worth the life of Jesus. He laid down his very life because God wanted you to have a seat at his table. So when we remember these four things, we remain humble and we're able to give this kind of love and compassion to other people who are also made of dirt and small and just as broken as we are. We're able to be compassionate. Part 3 is a short one, beginning in verse 12. Look with me there. It says, then Jesus said to his host, you know the host had to be a little panicked, right? I mean, he just had all that to say to the guests. And now he goes, and as for you, right? So he says to the host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they might invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Remember, we have to remember that this is a parable. And so the underlying spiritual lesson is about the great feast that is still yet to come, that great wedding feast at the end of time. And Jesus says, if you live your life in a way that where you only do good for others when they can help you, if you're only kind to those who will return the favor, well, that's prideful living. But instead, you should live your life in a way that is good news to the poor, that cares for people who actually can't do anything for you at all. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the need to care for the poor because I'm so thankful that here at this church, you can't go a month in this church without hearing something from Andy about the need to care for the poor, to meet the needs of people. Like, we believe here at WellSpring that that's not something just for missionaries or the spiritual elite, but that's like for all of us. That Proverbs says when you lend to the poor, you're lending to God himself. That Matthew 25 says that one day we'll stand before God and he will say, hey, I'm going to decide who just said Jesus is Lord and who actually had Jesus as the Lord of their life. And he says, here's how I'm going to tell the difference. If you cared for the poor, then hey, you were sincere in your profession of faith. He says he's going to say to some people, hey, when I was hungry and I was thirsty and I was in prison and I was alone and I was sick and you actually cared for me. And we're going to say, well, when on earth did I see you, Jesus, in any of those situations? And Jesus is going to say, hey, whatever you did for the very least down there on earth, you were actually doing it for me. You were demonstrating that your faith was genuine. And so we know that caring for the poor is important. Here at WellSpring, that's a high priority. So I want to spend time on that, but instead I want to just get to the deeper point Jesus was making, which, yeah, it's good to care for the poor, but did you know that you're the poor in this parable? I'm the poor. I'm the crippled and the lame. I'm the sick. I'm the one in need. And Jesus, being the perfect host, God being the good host, he invited me to the party. He invited me to the table. In fact, the only thing you have to do to get to this party, you don't have to be excellent or pious. All you have to do is just say, yeah, that's me. Yeah, I need God. I'm poor. I need a seat at your table, God. In the book of Revelation, in chapter 3, it's near the end of time, and Jesus is saying words to a church in a city called Laodicea. This church is a lot like America. It's very wealthy and very accomplished, and it's kind of the envy of the nations. And he says to them in Revelation chapter 3, verse 17, you brag, I'm rich, I've got it made, I need nothing from anyone. You're oblivious that in fact you're a pitiful, blind beggar, threadbare, and homeless. It's possible to be on the outside, to look like we have it all together, but Jesus says, I see what's really happening inside, and you are in need. And in verse 20, a few verses later, Jesus says, look at me. I stand at the door and I knock, and if you'll just hear me call and open the door, I'll come in and I'll sit down to supper with you. As guests of the host, we're to be humble, knowing that we're only here because God allows us to be. He made us, and we're small, and we're broken and in need, and he loves us. And so God, being the good host, he invites us. We're the man with dropsy. We're the man with the sickness. We're the ones on the outside that shouldn't be cared about, but God cares. And he invites us in and gives us a seat at his table. And that should humble us in a way that when we come across other guests down here on earth who are just as small and just as broken as we are, we can be compassionate toward them. Pray with me. God, we thank you for giving us a seat at the table. We ask you now, God, to speak to us. Each of us are poor in our own way. We all have needs of different kinds, and only you know that. I don't. So, God, we're just going to be quiet for a minute and ask you to speak to each one of us. Is there an area of our life where we've been a bit too proud and not given you enough credit? Would you show that to us? Are there people, God, that we look down upon? And we forget that, we're all made and we're all poor and we're all in need. Would you show us that and move us to give grace and friendship to everyone? I'm going to be quiet, and God, I ask you to speak to each of us. Amen.